Stories are powerful, and I reckon a powerful way that Christians can share their hope in Jesus is by telling the stories about Jesus. The power of stories was brought home to me early in my married life when I spent Christmas with my wife's extended family under the carport around the trestle table. It was a noisy affair, everyone kind of talking over each other, ribbing each other, paying each other out. And yet I realised that people would quiet each other down when someone had a story to tell. Stories are the way we connect with each other, the way we share memories and build bonds, and they often give a powerful insight into what really matters to people. When you listen to the stories people tell, you'll hear sometimes there are common themes. Sometimes you notice who's always the hero or who the villain is, who's to blame for things. You'll hear what people hope for, what they're frustrated about and complain about, where they think the problem is in life. All sorts of things are revealed as people share stories. And so I think it would be great for Christians to share stories, and you can share your own story, but in particular, I think, sharing the stories about Jesus, the stories Jesus tells, or the stories that are told about him from the Gospels are a great place to start. It's worth just finding, do you have a favourite? Is there one that particularly speaks to you or has been significant in your own faith journey, or just the last one you heard in a sermon on Sunday? And spend some time with it, read it and reread it, maybe map it out or do like a storyboard like they do for movies, or a kind of graphic novel if that helps you follow the flow. And then practice telling it. Find a friend and ask them if it's okay, if you can practice with them, or maybe you can each practice going back and forth and see if you've got all the details and are picking out the key things. And then just practice more. Practice sharing it with other people who are believers, maybe perhaps people in your Bible study group or people from church. And practice sharing it and see what doors God opens for you to share it with others. I think it could be quite powerful. One of my favourite stories is from Luke 18. It's the story Jesus tells, the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector, these two men who go to the temple to pray. One of them's a kind of reputable, moral, rule-keeping guy, the Pharisee, really well regarded and looked upon in his society. And the other one is a tax collector, not just that he kind of no one likes paying taxes, but he was working, kind of collaborating with the Roman oppressors and skimming a bit off the top for his own benefit. And so these two men go to the temple, and the Pharisee, the first man, stands and he sort of thanks God for how good he is. Oh, God, I do all the right things. I avoid doing the wrong things. I'm certainly better than that tax collector over there. Aren't you lucky to have me, is kind of the guts of his prayer. But the other man, the tax collector, he won't even look upwards. His eyes are downcast. He just says, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And this is one of my favourite stories because it's a story where Jesus demonstrates his insight into what we're like. We're often, particularly rule keepers, big on sort of comparing ourselves with others, that sort of sideways glance that I'm a bit ahead of them, and that makes me feel good. But also, there's a sting in the tail and a surprise to this story as Jesus tells it, because he says, it's not the person you might expect, the good and moral and upright person who goes home in the right with God that day. It's actually the person who realises he needs God's mercy. And that speaks to me because I know I'm a person who needs God's mercy. So I love telling that story, and I want to encourage you, find a story that speaks to you and practice telling it. To give you an example of how powerful stories can be, there's this really fantastic ministry at St Paul's Cathedral, the Anglican Cathedral in the heart of Melbourne, where there are people who stand by the stained glass windows that depict scenes from the Gospels and from the Scriptures. And as people kind of gather around, visitors to the cathedral who are looking at the stained glass windows, these people who have been trained to tell the story about Jesus from those windows. It's been an amazingly powerful ministry that has opened significant doors. People who've heard those stories have engaged in further conversation. Many of them have been open to receiving copies of the Scriptures that they can read themselves, and it's been very significant in many people's spiritual journey. Stories are powerful, and I think Christians should harness the power of telling the stories about Jesus to introduce them to the hope we have in him.